can't get along with everyone, especially in the wild world of wrestling. And for Jimmy Hart, one of the most legendary managers in the game, that was definitely true. He worked with some huge names, but not every partnership was smooth. Whether it was behind-the-scenes drama, clashing egos, or just not vibing, Jimmy had his fair share of wrestlers he didn't enjoy working with. The stories are wild, so let's dive into the wrestlers Jimmy Hart hated working with. Let's begin with the iconic hatred between Jimmy Hart and Jerry Lawler, a feud that became one of the most talked about rivalries in Memphis wrestling. What makes it so interesting is that, believe it or not, they actually started out on the same side. Lawler was the one who brought Hart into the wrestling world in the first place. At first, they worked well together. Lawler had the star power, and Hart brought energy and personality. But things eventually took a turn. And when the two split, it wasn't a quiet break. It turned into one of those wrestling fallouts that just kept growing. Lawler didn't hold back. He gave Hart the nickname The Wimp, which stuck hard with the Memphis crowd. And as if that wasn't enough, Lawler actually recorded a mocking song about him. It was classic Lawler, clever, a bit cruel, and designed to make fans laugh at Hart every time he walked into the arena. But Hart didn't fold under the pressure. He leaned into the hate and started building something of his own. He put together a group called the First Family, a stable of wrestlers who were constantly challenging Lawler and trying to knock him off his throne. Hart used his voice, his megaphone, and his ability to stir the crowd to become one of the most successful heel managers in the business. The feud worked so well because they were complete opposites. Lawler was the fan favorite, the guy Memphis loved. Hart was loud, annoying, and always scheming, and people loved to boo him. But behind all the drama, there was a strange kind of respect. Both of them knew how to work a crowd. Then comes the controversial drama with Money Inc., where Hart, the manager known for his loudmouth villain persona, found himself managing a team that would eventually turn into a source of deep hatred. The duo of the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase and Irwin R. Shyster was all about wealth, power, and ruthless tactics. It was a perfect fit for Hart, who had always been at his best when surrounded by chaos and controversy. Together, they made an unstoppable trio, and for a while things were looking great. But then, something unexpected happened, something that would change everything for Hart. The team's ruthless nature began to push the limits. Money Inc. wasn't just about winning anymore. They were taking things too far. The turning point came when they attacked Brutus, the Barber Beefcake, a fan favorite, in one of the most brutal, shocking moments in the ring. Beefcake had been a star for years, beloved by fans for his larger-than-life personality and his fun gimmick. Seeing him get destroyed like that stirred something in Hart. For the first time in a long while, he began to question his alliance with Money Incorporated. It was this moment that led to a major shift in Hart's character. The fans had always known him as a manager who did whatever it took to get ahead, regardless of how dirty the tactics were. But attacking Beefcake, a guy who wasn't just another opponent but a beloved character, was a line Hart wasn't willing to cross. It became clear that Hart didn't agree with the direction Money Inc. was going. In a shocking move, he broke away from the group, turning his back on DiBiase and Shyster. This wasn't just another heel turn, it was a major shift in Hart's alignment. For the first time in years, he became a face. Fans who had been conditioned to boo him suddenly found themselves cheering for the guy who had once made a career out of annoying them. Now, if you're a Jimmy Hart fan, you obviously know about the famous animosity between him and the Funk Brothers. It wasn't just some passing disagreement, it was a rivalry that had fans on the edge of their seats wondering just how far it would go. The Funk Brothers, Dory and Terry Funk, were two of the toughest, roughest wrestlers out there, and they brought a certain intensity wherever they went. Jimmy Hart, on the other hand, was the loud, over-the-top manager who knew how to make people hate him. So when these two forces collided, it created fireworks, but not in the way you might expect. The pairing between Jimmy Hart and the Funk Brothers was often called a mismatched combo, and for good reason. On paper, it didn't seem like a natural fit. The Funk Brothers were all about old-school wrestling, tough as nails and with a no-nonsense attitude. They weren't the type to let someone like Hart, who built his reputation on being the loudmouth, the troublemaker, tell them what to do. And yet there they were, working together. at least for a time. It's safe to say it wasn't an easy partnership. Hart thrived on being the center of attention, always in the spotlight, always with something to say. The Funks, on the other hand, didn't exactly need someone to speak for them. They were old-school wrestlers who let their actions in the ring do all the talking. So when Hart tried to play the role of manager for them, it often felt like a square peg in a round hole. They weren't the type to appreciate his antics, and Hart wasn't exactly a fan of their quiet intensity. It was a mix that, more often than not, resulted in tension rather than chemistry. Despite all this, there was something undeniably entertaining about watching the three interact. Jimmy Hart, with his megaphone and never-ending energy, would try to rally the Funk brothers, while the Funks, serious, no-nonsense wrestlers, would often shoot him a look that said, "Just stay out of the way." It was this dynamic that made their relationship so intriguing. You could feel the underlying tension every time they stepped into the ring or even during their backstage moments. Fans loved it because, whether they realized it or not, they were witnessing a clash of personalities, one that was as entertaining as it was awkward. What made it even more interesting was how Hart responded to the Funk brothers' tough persona. He wasn't the kind of guy to just back down from a challenge. So even when they didn't seem to care about his presence, Hart kept pushing, trying to get the attention he thrived on. His over-the-top approach clashed with their more reserved, intense style, but it also created some truly memorable moments, especially when the tension between them spilled over into the ring. If you think that working closely with someone for a long time automatically leads to liking them, think again, because despite their long partnership, Jimmy Hart never really grew fond of Hulk Hogan. They were both major figures in the world of wrestling, and their partnership seemed almost natural at first. Hart was Hogan's manager, hyping him up, taking care of the trash talk, and making sure the crowd was always fired up. For a while, it looked like a perfect fit, but behind the scenes, things weren't as smooth as they seemed on TV. As much as they worked together, it was clear that Jimmy Hart wasn't exactly fond of Hogan. It wasn't that Hart didn't appreciate Hogan's success or what he had done for the industry. It was more about personal differences. Hart had always been a loud, in-your-face kind of guy, while Hogan was more of a calm, focused leader. They had different ways of approaching the business and probably even their personal lives. And over time, those differences started to show. What seemed like a solid partnership started to feel more like a strained alliance. The turning point came when Hart made a shocking move. After years of managing Hogan and being part of his iconic matches, he turned on him. This wasn't just a small moment, it was a big deal. Hart, the guy who had always been associated with Hogan, suddenly joined the Dungeon of Doom, a faction known for its dark, twisted nature. The Dungeon of Doom wasn't exactly the group you'd expect Jimmy Hart to align with, especially given his colorful, high-energy persona. But there he was, joining forces with the likes of Kevin Sullivan and the other heels in the group. This storyline development made it clear that there was some serious conflict going on, even if it was part of the show. For fans, it was a jaw-dropper. It felt like a betrayal, especially since Hart had been such a key part of Hogan's career. The idea of Hart turning on his longtime ally was hard to swallow at first, but it made for some incredibly interesting TV. It added layers to both characters. Hogan, the ever-popular hero, now had an enemy in Hart, and Hart was now aligned with a group that represented everything Hogan wasn't. It was a clash of worlds, and that made the story all the more engaging. Moving on to one of the more memorable rivalries of the early 1990s, Brutus the Barber Beefcake and Jimmy Hart clashed in a storyline that was both entertaining and full of character-driven drama. Their feud, which played out in WWE, wasn't as intense or long-lasting as some of the biggest rivalries in wrestling history, but it had all the right ingredients to capture the audience's attention. It was a story of contrasting personalities, with Beefcake as the lovable fan favorite and Hart as the villainous, loudmouth manager. The two went toe-to-toe, not just with fists, but with egos, pride, and a signature element that made their rivalry stand out: hair. At the heart of this feud was Brutus Beefcake's famous gimmick as the Barber. The character's appeal was simple but effective. After every match he won, Beefcake would grab his trusty pair of shears and cut off a chunk of his opponent's hair, leaving them humiliated in front of the crowd. It was a quirky, fun gimmick that made him one of the more unique characters in the WWE at the time. On the other side of the ring was Jimmy Hart, a manager known for his flashy style and loud personality. Hart didn't just manage his clients, he made sure to involve himself in every match, creating chaos and making life miserable for anyone who stood in his way. Their feud really started to heat up when Beefcake began to get involved with Jimmy Hart's clients. Beefcake, being the hero of the fans, was always trying to defend the underdogs, which often meant stepping in when Hart's wrestlers were looking to cheat or take shortcuts. This set the stage for a clash between Beefcake's sense of justice and Hart's manipulative ways. But the real kicker came when Beefcake, known for his Barber persona, turned his attention to Hart himself. It all came to a head at the 1989 SummerSlam event, a pay-per-view where Beefcake and Hart's rivalry finally boiled over. Beefcake had already had enough of Hart's interference and antics, and he was ready to put a stop to it once and for all. After a hard-fought match, Beefcake did what he did best. He grabbed his scissors and, in a moment that shocked the WWE Universe, cut off a chunk of Jimmy Hart's iconic hair. Hart, who was used to being the one in control, was humiliated. For a manager who prided himself on his appearance and loud personality, having his hair cut in front of the live crowd was a public disgrace. It was the perfect payback, and the fans went wild. The feud wasn't just about the haircuts, though. It was about the contrast between the two men. Beefcake was the fun-loving, fan-favorite hero who wanted to make the wrestling world a better place by taking down the bad guys. Hart, on the other hand, was a master manipulator who thrived on chaos and controlled the storylines from behind the scenes. Their rivalry had the classic good guy versus bad guy dynamic, but it was the little details like the haircuts that made it memorable. Although their feud didn't last long, it left a lasting impact on WWE history. The image of Beefcake cutting off Hart's hair became one of those iconic moments that fans remember for years. It wasn't about bloodshed or lengthy brawls, it was about personality, humor, and that one perfect moment where the good guy finally got the last laugh. That wraps up today's video. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update, and we'll see you soon.